Okay, so here we are in this section. We are graphing inverse functions. So first off, how do we find an inverse function? So let me go to a fresh screen here. So they're saying f of x is, what is it, x plus 5. Okay, so here's how we find an inverse. To find an inverse, step 1, you invert x and y, or switch. Invert or switch x and y. Step 2, solve for y. Well, that's it. Invert x and y, solve for y. No. I said switch x and y. Where's y? Well, remember, f of x, function letters are always y. F of x, g of x, h of x. That's always y by common agreement in the math science world. So if I take that over here, y equals x plus 5, and I do step 1, I switch them. So x equals y plus 5. So that's the switch, the invert. That's what it means by inverse function. You invert or switch x and y. Step 2, solve for y. So I take this equation and I solve for y. How do you get y alone? Subtract 5 from both sides, so y is x minus 5. So there it is. That's the inverse function. Now it wants us to graph both of them. Okay, so come right here on the axis system. Let's go back to the red one first off. How do we graph this one? Remember, when you get y alone, that's where you start. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up 5. Up 5, right in the middle. And then from there, you do the slope. What's the slope? 1 over 1. Remember, that's rise over run. Go up 1 over 1. Connect the dots. So there's the red graph. Now for the purple, same thing here. We start at negative 5, so that's down 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the slope, 1 over 1 again. Rise over run. So go up 1 over 1 and connect the dots. So that's what it wants you to do. Graph the original function in red and the inverse function in purple, and it wants you to type in the inverse function as the answer. There we go. Okay, so this is the same thing basically. This function is y equals 2x plus 5. Remember, the f of x is the y. Then over here on the side, they want me to find the inverse. How do I find the inverse? Step number 1, invert. Inverse function means invert or switch x and y. So I'm going to swap them. So x goes out here and y goes there. See what I did? I just took these two and swapped them. So now there's x in the front and y is over here. They've switched positions. Step 2, solve for y. So to solve that equation for y, I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides. And what will I get? X minus 5 is 2y. Divide by 2. When you divide by 2, divide all 3 by 2. See, I divided all 3 of them. And so that is a half x minus, and then 5 over 2, you should use your calculator, it's 2.5. There we go. So that's the inverse function. See how I got that? Because that was 1 over 2x, which is a half x, minus 2.5 equals y. Let's go to the graph. So going to the graph, start with the red one. So we start here at up 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right there. And then 2 over 1 is our rise over run. So I go up 2, 1, 2, over 1. Like that. Up 2 over 1. Now the black graph, the inverse, start, or maybe I'll do it in blue. Start at down. That's negative, huh? Negative 2.5. Start down 2.5. 1, 2, 3. So 2.5 is right about there, 2.5. Down, and then slope, rise, over run. So go up 1. See how that was a up 1? I went from middle to middle, up 1, over 2. So there's that line. So up 1, over 2. I went from midpoint to midpoint, and then over 2. So there we go. Okay, so here's number 3. Give me a function. Want me to find the inverse. So remember, this is y on the outside here. So this is y is 1/5 x minus 1. What's step 1? Invert. To find an inverse function, you invert x and y. So these guys will trade spots. Becomes x on the outside, y on the inside. Okay, now step 2 is solve for y. So we invert x and y, we solve for y. So how do I take this equation and solve for y? Well, whenever you have fractions, if you've got more steps to go, it's best to just get rid of them. So I'm going to multiply by multiplying by the common denominator. So multiply through by 5. It cancels there in the middle. And so we get 5x is 1y minus 5. Trying to get y alone now. Add 5 to both sides. Cancels out here. Y equals 5x plus 5. We did it. We got y alone. That's the inverse function. And up here, y is 1/5 x minus 1. That's the original function. Now we have to graph them both on the same axis system. So let's do the red one first. We start down 1, because that's a negative 1, huh? So down 1, and then rise over run. So we go up 1 and over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So up 1 over 5. Connect the dots. There's that one. Now for the purple one, we start up 5. You start here, right? Start up 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right there. And the slope is what? 5 over 1. Rise over run. Very steep. So I'm going to kind of go up into here. I'm going to erase this to have room. So I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and over 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, over 1. Up 5 over 1. Connect the two dots. There's that line. So there's the two lines graphed on the same axis system. Okay, so here we go. Number 4. They're giving me the function y equals x cubed plus 3. Oops, kind of getting scribbly there. And then I'm going to do the inverse function over here. And for the inverse, step 1, we invert or switch x and y. So I'm going to put x on the outside, y on the inside. See how they just switched? And now step 2, solve for y. So how do I solve that equation for y? Subtract 3 from both sides. We get x minus 3 is y cubed. And now how do we turn that into regular y? Got to solve for y, you know. Solve for y means get y alone. You cube root it, huh? Because cube rooting is the opposite of a third power. Third root's opposite of a third power. Cancels it out. And so you get y alone, cube root of x minus 3. Okay, so there's the inverse function. And now, that's what we would type in up here, cube root of x minus 3, where they want that negative 1 power thing. That means the inverse function. That's how they say inverse. That negative 1 power means inverse function of f. Okay, now the trick is we got to graph them both. How are we going to graph them both? Well, let's go to a fresh screen on these things, and then I'll kind of jump back and forth. So the original function y equals x cubed plus 3. Let's graph that first off. What am I going to do? I'm just going to make a little table, plug in some values. if I plug in 0, what do I get? Y equals 0 cubed plus 3, which is 3. If I plug in 1, I get 1 cubed plus 3, which is 4. If I plug in 2, I get 2 cubed plus 3, which is like 11. Okay. So 0, 3, 1, 4, 2, 11. And then for the red one, let me see this one, cube root of x minus 3. So y, this is the inverse function over here. Cube root of x minus 3. I'm going to make a little table, same kind of thing. If I put in 0, though, watch what's going to happen. Cube root of negative 3. You can do that on your calculator. It's kind of hard. I'm just going to skip it. I'm going to go on down to 3. That'd be easier. If you put in 3, how about I just skip that one? If you put in 3, cube root of 3 minus 3, right there I plugged in 3, which is 0. Okay, that came out 0. Now, can I put, what's another number that's nice? What else can I do the cube root of? Well, yeah, I guess maybe I should have done that one. Gonna have to, let me go back here. Guess I'll do it. Gonna have to just use your calculator. Cube root of negative 3. To do that on your calculator, it's kind of hard. You got to take negative 3 to the power of 1/3. I know that probably seems weird. A cube root, and you might have a cube root button on your calculator. If you have a cube root button, just do that. If you don't, you're going to have to do negative 3 to the power. That up arrow is power. You might have an x to the y button on your calculator. It's either an up arrow or an x to the y button. And then you got to put parentheses around the 1/3 power. See how I have parentheses around that? So if you do that, I'm going to do it right now myself. Negative 3 to the power of 1/3. I'm getting negative 1.44. So negative 1.44. Like that. All right, so now what does that mean about a graph? Let's go to a graph. What are we looking at? So the blue one, over 0 up 3, 1, 2, 3. There's a dot. Over 0 up 3, over 1 up 4. Right there. Over 2 up 11. So it's like 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Way up there. So this blue graph is like rocketing up like that. If we did more values over here, we'd find it goes down like that. So that's what the blue graph is. I just did those 3 points. That's 1, 4. No, that's 0, 3. No, that's 0, 3, 1, 4, 2, 11. So now the red graph, I'm going to go 0, negative 1.4, over 0, it's down 1, down 2. It's about right there. That's the point, over 0, down 1.44. It's like down 1.5 about, you know. And then over 3 up 0, over 3 up 0 right there. So it's, if you did, which graph looks like it? So this graph looks like it's kind of going sideways like that. Which one has the red going sideways, the blue up? There it is. See how it's graph A like that? So, yeah. So that's the one. Just like that. So the original function is blue and the inverse is red, they told me. So there it is. That's the one. So now on number 5, I want me to find the inverse function. So this is y equals, or let me bring it over here. This is y equals 4x plus x. Remember, f of x is y. And then how do I find an inverse? Remember, to find an inverse, step 1, invert x and y. So these guys switch. So x goes here, y goes there. And then step 2, solve for y. So invert x and y, solve for y. So how do you solve that equation? How do you get y alone? Subtract 6 from both sides. These cancel. And we get 4y is x minus 6. Now divide through by 4. Remember, when you divide, go all the way across. So I get y equals x over 4, then reduce that, divide by 2, 3/2. Y equals x over 4 minus 3/2. That's the inverse function. X over 4 minus 3/2. Or, I mean, you don't have, you could have just wrote x minus 6 all over 4. If you wanted to, you know, back here, if you wanted to just make it one big bar, you could do one big bar, one big 4, and that would give that answer. Or you could do a 4 under each one separately and then reduce this fraction. Either way, this is good, this is good. Math Excel knows they're both right. My Math Lab knows they're both right. It'll take them both. Okay, number 6. Bring it over here. We've got y equals x minus 1 over 5. Want to find the inverse function. So what do? Step 1, invert x and y. So this and this trade positions becomes x equals y minus 1 over 5. Invert x and y. Step 2, solve for y. So I have x equals y minus 1 over 5. How do I solve that equation for y? Well, when you have a fraction on each side, just put this over 1, so it's a fraction on each side, and then diagonal cross multiply. X times 5 equals 1 times y minus, this is a y up here. So then distribute, so we get y minus 1 is 5x. Last step to get y alone, add 1 to both sides. So y equals 5x plus 1. So 5x plus 1. There it is. That's the inverse function. Okay, let's try this one. Bring it over here. Y equals the cube root of x minus 3. Step 1, invert x and y. So to find an inverse function, invert x and y. So these guys trade positions. So x goes out here, y goes in there. That's the first step. Second step, solve for y. So bring that down here. We have x equals cube root of y minus 3. How am I going to solve for for y there? What are you going to do? Well, first I have to get rid of that third root. What's the opposite of a third root? Third power. Are you getting the hang of that? Roots and powers are opposites, and whatever you do to one side, you have no choice but to do the same thing to the other. So you got a third power both sides. These cancel, and we get y minus 3 is x to the third. Last step, add 3 to both sides so we can get that y alone. Trying to get y alone, right? Solve for y. Y equals x cubed plus 3. That's the inverse function, x cubed plus 3. See how that's the opposite of third root with a minus 3, third power with a plus 3? That's what inverse functions are. They're the opposite. See how that's exactly the opposite? Maybe we could have guessed at that. Okay, so they want me to find the inverse on this one. So first thing to realize, this is y. And then to find an inverse, step 1, we invert x and y. So these two trade spots, becomes x out here, y in there, invert x and y. Step 2, solve for y. So how am I going to solve that equation for y? Well, I put this over 1, diagonal, cross multiply. That's what you always do when you just have a fraction on each side. So we get x times 4y minus 1 is 1 times 8. Distribute. 4xy minus x is 8. Trying to solve for y, right? I want to get y alone. So add x to both sides. Gets rid of that. 4xy is 8 plus x. Bring it up here. 4xy is 8 plus x. How do you finish getting y alone? Divide by the 4x. Boom, boom. There it is. That's the inverse function. See how that is, it's the opposite function from the original function. Okay. Here, let's try that one. I'll move it to a fresh screen. F of x equals x minus 4 cubed. Okay, so want me to find the inverse. So this is y out here. So the step 1, invert x and y. So this y and this x, we invert them, we trade positions. So x goes out here, y is in there. Good. Now, so that's step 1. Step 2, solve for y. How do I take that equation? Let me rewrite it here. X equals y minus 4 to the third. And how do I solve for y? Well, you got to get rid of that third power, don't you? What's the opposite of a third power? A third root, right? If you get in the hang of that, roots and powers are opposites. So if I third root both sides, it cancels that power. So roots and powers are opposites, and they cancel each other out. And now, to finish getting y alone, we just add 4 to both sides. So y is the cube root of x plus 4. That's the inverse function. You see, that's the opposite. The original function here was subtract 4, third power. The opposite of that is third root, add 4. It's the inverse function. It's the opposite function. Okay, on this question they say graph the inverse of the function on the same set of axes. So here they have some function, and they want me to graph the opposite of that, the inverse function. Now, how do I graph the inverse function? Well, this can be a little different because they're not giving me an equation. So an inverse function, what does it do? What is an inverse function? Well, it inverts or switches x and y, x's and y's. Okay, great, but what are my x's and y's? Well, take a look. Look over here at this blue line and see if you can find any point where it hits right on an axis. Like, how about right there? See, it hits right on a grid. So I don't want to use this point. It's hard to tell where that is exactly. But see the point I found that's right on? Here's another one, boom, right on. Here's another one, boom, right on. So those points hit right on clear grid marks. Like, what's the coordinates of this point? It's over 2, up 3. And what's the coordinates of this point here? It's over 1, up 0. And what's the coordinates of that point right there? It's over 0, down 3, right? Pretty good with that. So now, let me bring that over here. So I've got 2, 3, 1, 0, 0 must be. I could have done more, but those were just 3 really easy, obvious ones. I just grabbed them. So that's the original function. Now, switch them. For the inverse, switch them. So this will be 3, 2, 0, 1, right? Switch these two. And switch these two. Right? Because it's x, y, and now I switched them. That's what an inverse function does. It switches x's and y's. Now put these dots on the graph and connect them. They'll be the inverse function. So 3, 2, that's over 3 up to it's right here. Here's 3, 2. And 0, 1 over 0 up 1, that's right here. And minus 3, 0, that's right here. Wait a minute, that's not looking... Oh yeah, I guess that's right. Minus 3, 0. Connect those. There it is. There's the inverse function. So I got those dots. They're just the inverting of the other dots. We really only needed 2 of them. All you have to have is 2 blue dots. Switch x and y. Put your 2 red dots on the graph and graph your line. That's the inverse graph. That's the opposite graph, the inverse function. It's a switching and inverting of x and y. So just find some blue xy points. Just 2 of them really is all you need, and then switch them. Switch x and y, find your 2 red points, and graph your line. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to look really carefully and try to find some points. See how these are going by 2? Here's the original. I'm over here in the original graph. Same kind of thing. We're supposed to graph the inverse function. So you remember what we need to do. We need to find some blue dots on the original graph and then invert them to find the dots on the inverse function. So this goes by 2. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, right? So and same thing goes up by 2, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So this dot right here on the end, can you see the coordinates of that? Must be over 10 up 2. And then this point right here, let's just do the two ends. This point right here, this is over halfway, so it must be over 5 up 0. See those two dots? So let's take them over here. So 10, 2, and 5, 0. Okay, now what do? I invert them, because the inverse function is an inverting of x and y. So it becomes 2, 10, and 0, 5. You might wonder why we're doing such a weird thing as inverse functions, but in higher math and science, they use inverse functions all the time to do math and science and engineering and real life things. So it's an important thing we're studying here. All right, so the inverse function is going to have 210. So let's find the point 210. Over 2 up 10 is right there, isn't it? Isn't that over 2 up 10? Because this is 2 here. Over 2 up 10. And then 0, 5 over 0 up 5, it's halfway right there. So it's going to connect those two. So it's that graph, isn't it? Okay, so same thing again. They want me to graph the inverse function. So how do we do it? We find some points on the blue graph, we invert them, and we get the red points. So here's one, 0, 0. But that's going to invert to just be 0, 0, so that's not all that helpful. How about this one right here? That one seems to be right on a cross line. What's that? Back 5 up 2. Back 5 up 2. That's good enough. I got 2 dots. Let's switch them. So you take 0, 0 and back 5, 2. And what do we do for the inverse function? We invert them. We invert x and y. So invert them, 0, 0. Invert them, 2 minus 5. So 0, 0, that's going to be the same exact dot. And then over 2 down 5, that's right here. Over 2 down 5, 0, 0, 0, 0. Connect those two dots. There's the other line. So it's C, isn't it? We got it. So that's inverse functions.